I find that the majority of people that don't have $1,000 that they can put together is because they don't even keep track. And one of the easiest, very first steps that I give to people by way of getting their finances under control and really, again, getting the best possibility of any kind of growing their businesses is by keeping a really clear financial tracking.
You're listening to Ecomonics, a Debutify podcast, your resource for one-of-a-kind insights into the world of e-commerce and business in the modern age. This is Joseph. I'll be presenting a wealth of industry knowledge from interviews with successful business people and our own state-of-the-art research. Your time is valuable, so let's go. My conversation with Matthew Pillmore taught me some valuable lessons about how we view our finances. He's provided a ton of great information, including a one-of-a-kind cash flow cruncher you can check out this instant to get a grip on your own financial status. Would it help to do that before listening to this episode? I don't know. Try it out. Let me know. podcast@debutify.com. While there's a lot to learn from the questions I ask and the content I viewed, I also gained valuable insights just hearing about how he lives his life, the result of putting his knowledge into practice. Matthew Pillmore, it is good to have you here on Ecomonics. Thank you for joining us. How are you doing today? How are you feeling?
You know, I'm blessed. Crazy times we're in, but feeling very grateful these days. Welcomed a new member to our household. Got a puppy 2 days ago, so it's been a lot of fun chasing dogs around.
You were gracious enough to make sure that dog is not a featured guest on the show. So I've had to edit out paw prints in the past on other people's work that I've done. The pitter patter, it's cute, but not great for when two lawyers are trying to talk about standards and practices. So first question, we got to get this one going. It fires everything up. Tell us, Matthew, who you are and what do you do?
You bet. Well, thanks for having me on the podcast, Joseph. Looking forward to hopefully sharing some valuable information with your audience. My background started in wholesale residential mortgages, and I actually got into that by accident. I was canvassing neighborhoods with ADT security systems when I was 20 years old. Happened to be out on a Sunday, everybody's favorite day to get a solicitor at the door, of course. Ran into a gentleman by the name of Larry King, if you can believe that. And what was funny about Larry King when I first met him was that he had a pair of glasses on. And I just remember one of his earpieces was broken off of his glasses. He happens to mention to me, listen, if you can be out peddling security alarm system contracts on a Sunday while there's snow on the ground, you'd be excellent in the mortgage business. You should come on board. This was back in 2000. Now, you may be too young to remember, but in the early 2000s, there was this crazy refinance boom that was taking place. Not a whole lot unlike today, as a matter of fact. And essentially at that point, anybody could be in the mortgage industry. Didn't need any licensing, no insurance or bonding. And, he welcomed
so people could just get going. They just sign up and wow, I wouldn't have expected that.
Very competitive marketplace at the time, a lot of money to be made. People were getting into that subprime industry and they were making a ton of money doing it. And in my opinion, sort of misleading people. It made it very difficult for me because I was a very conventional, sort of in the box thinker when it came to mortgages. I didn't fall into that mentality of, hey, let's get people these what they called wire loans, where you were basically allowed to put anything you wanted on an application and the bank would be happy to give the money. So in order to separate ourselves from the competition, what we did was we began this branch of our mortgage company where we were educating people. And at the time I was, 20 years younger, obviously. I was in my early 20s. I had come out of college, like so many students, with destroyed credit. And because I was now in this space where credit was so relevant, I was really drawn to it. I became fascinated with the subject. At the time, there weren't platforms like YouTube or social media where there was a lot of information that you could dig into. The internet was fairly ambiguous when it came to the details behind these formulas. And so when we had the opportunity to make an investment into this mentorship program with two of the leaders in that space, we jumped at it. It was a scary decision. It cost a lot of money. We spent $15,000 as well as $300 a month to stay enrolled. And they provided some CRM software tools. And essentially we were able to become known as authorities in on the subject of both personal and business credit. And so by the age of 25, I was invited to a lot of various radio programs, a handful of television shows. And so, we just ended up sort of well known for our knowledge about building credit. And so by the time, I was in my mid 20s, it started to branch even further. I became just enamored with the subject to the point where I was almost second guessing why is this knowledge so important? And as I dug further, it really uncovered this whole world of how people can rely on their borrowing strength, on their lender worthiness, if you will. And by doing so, you could access and kind of tap into these sources of capital. Again, both through the personal side and the business side. And by allowing yourself sort of a top tier borrowing position, you end up with this money that you can use for a variety of reasons. And once we began to go to that next kind of third stage of the conversation, beyond getting access to the money, it became a question of how to use it. And we started to realize that almost everything we had ever learned in our lifetime, the traditional form of financial education, whether it be in the household or in schools, it was wrong. It's very much in favor of the banks, of course. It's very much tailored towards convincing people that they really should be worker bees, right? W-2'd employees versus out venturing on their own, and how to leverage these various types of capital to our advantage. And so I had a lot of great influences along the way that I'm happy to share on today's podcast. But ultimately, it led where we are today, where we connected what I call the 3 C's of proper banking and borrowing, which involves optimization of credit. The second being the acquisition of capital. That's on an annual basis. Every year, we're trying to get at least $25,000. That number can be even as much as $250,000. Much of it is we don't pay any money for by way of interest costs unless we use it. It's revolving. And the third step being the growth of cash flow. And cash flow is really my specialty. So where I educate people either in person or online, I'm teaching people how to grow their leftover net cash flow position at the end of each month, which then provides people the ability to make choices throughout their life. And that's lifestyle-based choices. Freedom comes from cash flow. And so we're very particular about doing our research and putting together mathematical equations that lead us to a favorable outcome with respect to living life by design.
Mm-hmm. There's a lot of places that I can take this conversation, because you've given me a lot of different areas that we can go to. One thing that I want to establish as an understanding in regards to cash flow is what actually technically qualifies as that. Like, if I get a paycheck from my job, and the money left over from after taxes or expenses, does that count as cash flow? Is it essentially any money coming in, or are there parameters or restrictions to what actually counts?
It's anything left over that you take home. So we don't count taxes, right? We don't necessarily take the withholdings that come from a paycheck. Cash flow is what's left over that enters into the home. And what we're looking for, there's 2 forms of that. There's a gross cash flow position, and there's a net cash flow position. Gross cash flow is what you would have left over after all of your debts have been paid in full. Your net cash flow is with your debt servicing still in place. So net cash flow is the most important number of the 2. It represents where you'll be after all of your debts have finally been satisfied. And that's an objective that we teach. We teach our audience how to what we call beat the banks with respect to managing our leverage and our debt servicing. We pay it off on an accelerated basis. So a lot of fascinating strategies as to how to do that. Both mortgage and non-mortgage debts. Our typical students will end up paying their homes off in anywhere between 5 to 10 years, most typically. And there are some anomaly circumstances, myself included, where we've managed to pay off 30-year loans in well under 5 years. So a lot of really powerful ways of avoiding tremendous amounts of interest costs.
That's fantastic. And one of the things that stuck out to me from earlier, from the answer to my question, is that you were saying how many students are coming out of school and they're burdened by debt. And I grew up, had a house, had internet, had food, and those are all things that other people would consider a privilege which is fair. But I got to say, one of, I think, the most amazing privileges that I have experienced is not having debt. My parents were willing to. They had money put away for college. They were willing to pay for it. It was a 2-year program. It didn't exactly break the bank. I wasn't trying to be a doctor, but the fact that I got out of college and I didn't have a significant financial advantage, but I had a neutral position, which I could take with me as I try to make my way into the marketplace, and that is massive. And I do feel for a lot of people who are burdened with this debt, because it doesn't just take away their ability to make investments and to try to thrive and to get themselves into a better position, but it eats away at their mental well-being as well.
Oh, I completely agree with you. And there's also another side of this story. And I think, Joseph, this is where a lot of people go wrong. When I mentioned my influencers, the first person I really stumbled into early in my career was Robert Kiyosaki. And he's the author of the Rich Dad, Poor Dad series. Has really a cult following to it, especially in the real estate community, which I'm heavily involved with. And it really struck a chord with me, because here's this guy that's teaching a lot of the same concepts that I believed were true, by way of the education system leaving us without the knowledge we need to remain fiscally savvy. And I think that goes beyond fiscal responsibility in a lot of ways, because I think the traditional definition of fiscal responsibility is very much what you're describing here, right? How do we minimize our debt loads? How do we cash flow most things? How do we just pay for things with cash and avoid this heavy burden of debt? However, Robert Kiyosaki had this kind of revolutionary state of mind surrounding debt, right? And he was sort of the author of the good debt, bad debt conversation. Well, good debt is representative of leverage, right? Being able to borrow somebody else's money. He calls it OPM, the acronym, whereby you can then
Okay, my mind went to a different place there for a second.
Gotcha. Okay.
Yeah.
And ultimately, the good debt formula is where you're able to pull in speculated rates of return that exceed the cost of the money that you're borrowing. And in today's climate, that is extremely powerful, because I just closed on a mortgage on a property at 2.875%. That a lot of people would say, why would you ever pay that off? And as I grew my businesses, as I grew my real estate investing portfolio, I found myself growing far less comfortably by way of my debt load than I wanted. And I surpassed $1 million, and that was really my pain threshold, where I started thinking to myself, okay, and especially when you're in your mid 20s and it's the mid 2000s, those numbers were a lot higher than they even are now today. I mean, you're in California, it's hard to find houses that are less than $1 million. And so at that point, I'm thinking to myself, this is not something I'm willing to sleep well at night accepting. What can be done about this? Which is when I ran into another main influencer in my life, which was Dave Ramsey, another very, very popular personality, started on the radio, obviously huge on YouTube now. And he's completely the opposite, right? The pendulum swung all the way to the other side, whereby he's saying, hey, you should avoid debt at all costs, including but not limited to cutting up your credit cards. You shouldn't even be using credit cards that you're paying in full every month to earn rewards points from. And again, I'm sitting here looking at a lot of the advice given and really favoring a lot of it, whereas the other side of the story just seemed not to fit my narrative. I was interested in the banks paying me to use their product. And so what we really did was find a middle of the road there. It was a happy medium between the two. So it's not that I disagree with using leverage. I love the power of leverage. I think it's one of the most important key ingredients to massive acceleration to wealth creation, whether you're in the e-commerce space, an entrepreneur in any other industry, and or a W-2 wage earner who wants to diversify their investments. Ultimately, the second you use leverage, it becomes debt. which is my worst enemy. And it's fair to argue it's a contradiction. And yet the way I compartmentalize this financial philosophy, this religion, is that I just don't agree with the terms that I signed on the dotted line to get. The fact that I got a 30-year loan doesn't mean I have to keep it for that long. I'm able to get the leverage and, again, attack it as if it is a vulnerability and a weakness of mine, which it is. And if you go back to the collapse of the last market downturn of the economy in 2008 and several years beyond that, you'll find that the main exposure people had was their debt. It was the problem, and people were 11 million people or thereabouts were making their way to the bankruptcy attorney's offices and finding themselves starting over, and that can take a decade. So we've got to be very careful with that.
I was in college when it was the 2008 financial crisis. And just a brief story. So that was when I first started doing podcasting, and I would rent material from the electronics department and invite my classmates to come on. And I was using a free podcasting hosting service at the time. And once the recession had hit, the podcasting service had to contact everybody and say, due to the recession, we can't afford to host this content any longer. And so my show got shut down. And we all had a good laugh because I said, Joe, of all the people to be affected by the financial crisis, it had to be you and your podcast. So just I mean, for me, it's hilarious, and I love thinking back to it, but it's a ripple effect where this thing doesn't just affect a small pocket of people. It just comes in waves and waves. It hits this person, then it hits that person, connected to that person. And before you know it, the whole country and the whole continent has faced the impact of it. Beyond the continent, the whole world starts to face the impact.
And so, but yet, putting yourself in a position of avoidance because of the fear of the risks involved, I personally think leaves a lot of opportunity on the table. And for those of us who wait to identify that opportunity, would you mind if I share a quick story with you here?
By all means, I'd be happy to hear it.
I just want to give you an example. So on Monday, which happened to be my birthday, I actually had an opportunity where we inked a deal on a new business. Now, I'm a serial entrepreneur. I do this all the time, where I start various random businesses, and much of the research and development that goes into some of the businesses we start leads us to a dead end where we ultimately figure out, hey, this is a deal breaker. This is not a business that we're going to continue to pursue. And we stop even before it starts. Now, this was a different situation. And I just kind of want to give, people optimism that, look, you can look outside of where you're at today. I'm definitely somebody that generates a lot of money through being online, being an influencer. And yet here we were inking a deal in the septic and sewer world. I've got this gentleman that lives in town with me. He's become a good friend of mine over the last 6 months. In fact, I needed him when I hired him for a property that I own in our town, and there was a leak under the sink. He's a local plumber. I live in a small town. There's only 3,000 people here. So I have very limited trades professionals that I can rely on. When he entered the home, he started making small talk and just got to know me and vice versa. And when he asked what I did and I mentioned I was a YouTuber, he said, wow, that just gave me chills on my arms because I've been thinking about getting into YouTube too. Would you be open to maybe sharing some of your knowledge with me about finances and business? Which after I told him what I did, he's told me that he had a new baby in the Philippines, and he was really excited about trying to blow his business up next year. I agreed to do that, and he said, listen, I won't charge you for any plumbing at any point. Now that's a huge resource to have in your back pocket when you're dealing with rental properties. And it's a short-term rental. And so I was thrilled. He's become this good friend, very trustworthy individual. As of Sunday, we sat down. Monday, we agreed to me basically supplying him with some equipment that he's been wanting for the past 2 years in order to expand into the drainage, sewer scope, and jetting industry alongside his normal plumbing services. But he can't afford the $25,000 it takes to buy the scope and the jetter. Now, I said, listen, in exchange for 45% of all invoices that you charge even drive times for, I will supply for you these two pieces of equipment. Once the equipment is paid off after the $25,000 is recouped, I'm going to actually go into a 35% of all invoicing in perpetuity. Now, his expectation based on him receiving anywhere between 3 to 5 calls every single day, even while not having this equipment, is that we'll be able to generate somewhere between $100,000 to $250,000 next year collectively. Now, after obviously paying for various expenses, my split on that could be anywhere north of $45K on a $25,000 investment. That investment came from one of these tools that we rely on. Now, we call these tools debt weapons. It's just a fun term we gave them when we were early in our career. We spent a lot of our time focusing on the debt elimination benefits that come from these tools. But the secondary and third benefits that are there involve being able to take $25,000 like I am in this situation for what I'm expecting will be a huge return on my investment, or just having access to the money as a safety net in the form of an emergency reserve, which is far different than what we were taught growing up. What we're taught growing up by way of emergency reserves is tuck money away in a cash account in the bank, savings or checkings, and those accounts will earn virtually nothing. Now, by me just simply taking this and putting it to work for me, I'm using the Robert Kiyosaki philosophy of leveraging other people's money into returns on that investment that are far superior than what it's going to cost me to give it to them. And then I'm able to repay it by using the Dave Ramsey philosophies of hating my debts, using a collection of techniques. I use a different technique than Dave Ramsey. It's faster, a little more complicated, but it saves future interest costs, allow me to pay things off more quickly. And I'm eliminating these balances in literally what I'm expecting to be somewhere around the 6-month mark if we're at $100,000 in revenues, not higher. If it's higher than that, I could recoup and pay that loan off in a matter of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 months, right? There's no telling. So this is where I think people need to be really intuitive about their credibility, what has often been referred to as your life's financial report card, your credit, whereby you can then access various forms of these borrowing tools. And you can put this money into great ideas you have. You can put this money into great e-commerce business models that you've already seen proof of concept from. If you already have proof of concept, which is my recommendation, you can easily and safely quantify the data to put it to work for you using other people's money. If you don't have proof of concept, I'm usually discouraging people from borrowing money to go into something that's 100% speculated. If it's speculative, use your own money, save up your money, and be ready and willing to lose it if it doesn't work out. Now, I'm usually discouraging people from building out their own business model or roadmap versus following somebody else's pre-existing plan that, again, has a social evidence to it, where they're able to take you by the hand and show you the ropes. I usually recommend people do that first. I did not follow that approach. We've invented multiple business models where we trailblazed, and it was extremely painful because we didn't have somebody else ahead of us taking all the arrows for us, like Russell Brunson likes to say, right? Go out. It's like walking through somebody's footprints in the snow. It's so much easier. So find somebody, but invest in their stuff with your own money, and then use other people's money to surge the momentum forward by way of getting access to capital that you wouldn't have otherwise if you had to sit back and save over an extended period of time.
One thing I want to mention being in Canada is that I have firsthand experience of trying to walk in other people's snow steps. It's a lot easier when they have like a wagon or a sled or something, and then it's just the trail is laid out. So one thing I want to get your perspective on is just how foundational borrowing and lending is. Obviously, I was about to say culturally, and I don't think I'm wrong in that because money is really tied into most, if not all, of our culture. I think that there is a disconnect, or there's, like you're saying, there's a fear of trying to borrow other people's money. And you broke down by saying that for speculative stuff, use your own money because we don't really know what's going to happen, hence speculation, versus stuff that we have more of a surefire sense of where it's going because the path has been laid out for us. But borrowing is tantamount to pretty much our whole society. Even on the highest level, the government has, if you look at the debt clock right now, it's one of the most mesmerizing things you'll see because that number will not stop growing. So our entire country runs on borrowing. And my philosophy, and I'd like to, if you can poke a hole in it, feel free, but borrowing is trust. It's taking a loan out on our future productivity. The reason why it doesn't bother me that the Fed continues to increase its debt is because there is this faith that the country will continue to be productive. And hopefully at some point we'll hit quantum speed technology and we'll be able to actually like surge way past this debt to the point where now I'm talking about like year 4,000 or something like that. So that's why I made peace with it, even though not many people are making peace with deficit spending. For some reason, I just kind of like, well, people are motivated to keep the country going, so I guess it's going to work out.
I mean, yeah, I have no idea. All I know is that there is limited control surrounding us. Mm-hmm. And we see that more and more than ever before. If anything, this year has demonstrated, it's the uncertainty that is involved when it comes to, the social economics that are involved in each household. And what I find is that you're going way beyond what most people are even equipped to understand, including myself. And I think we're very much kicking our can down the road right now by way of the bailouts and these stimulus. The government is it's incapable, in my own small mind, mathematically, of resolving itself. And that is why it is so much more important than ever before that we get things under control. Statistically, I'm not sure what the difference is between the US and Canada. However, it's been said many times that roughly 70% of people can't scratch together $1,000. That's a really big issue, especially when you suddenly find yourself in a global pandemic and jobs are on the line and people are unsure where their next dollar is going to come from. So my recommendation for people is to stop with the fear mongering, stop seeking fear mongering. I eliminated my Facebook 4 months ago. It's been the best 4 months of my life. Social Dilemma was a great eye opener for a lot of that. It's designed to keep us in fear. You got to remain as proactive as possible. Stay with the things that you actually have some level of control over. And I find that the majority of people that don't have $1,000 that they can put together is because they don't even keep track. And one of the easiest, very first steps that I give to people by way of getting their finances under control and really, again, getting the best possibility of any kind of growing their businesses is by keeping a really clear financial tracking. We provide a spreadsheet. Your audience is more than welcome to it. It's completely free of charge. We don't have any funnel that's associated with it where they might feel like this is some sort of a strings attached type of an offer. Simply go to cashflowcruncher.com to download it. It's a very simple Excel spreadsheet. I generally recommend people separate those between their personal as well as their business, have one for each. The personal household is its own ecosystem. The business is paying you. You have your own household expenses and your personal living expenses, whereas on the business, you're going to have its own income coming into the business by way of any of the revenues that you have, where you'll track the revenues for that as well as the business expenses, including one of which is the distributions to you that show up on your personal household cash flow cruncher. And what that will do is actually give you both the net and the gross cash flow that's there on average at the end of each month. And I recommend that you use these based on averages. And you can use an overarching average, and you can then narrow it into each month an updated version, because every single person has obviously a variable involved with their expenses. And some people have a variable involved with their income, especially e-commerce folks, especially as entrepreneurs, anybody who's self-employed, anybody who's commission-based. We're dealing with inconsistency with what we're earning. So use averages on that tool, but it is a phenomenal way of seeing things. And it doesn't matter whether you're disappointed about the outcome or you're pleasantly surprised by what you see when you're finished with the exercise. Every person that I have a chance to speak with unanimously agrees that it was a productive exercise to have that finished. So take the time. If you're diligent about your money, it should take you about 30 minutes to complete it. If you're disorganized, you need it even worse, but it will take you slightly longer to get that all that data transposed into the spreadsheet. But it is very, very much the very first step that I would recommend to every audience you have is to simply track what you have coming in and what you have going out. And you will be surprised, but you'll have the empowerment to make very small adjustments and manipulations to it in order to plug leaks. And very rarely do we see people with less than $100 of improvement instantly per month. And many people are north of 500, in some cases even north of $1,000 per month by just doing self audits periodically on that. From there, you can get a little bit more advanced. Our YouTube channel, VIP Financial Education, teaches tons of different ways that you can strategically use these debt weapon tools to grow your cash flow and to build your business with them.
And one thing I want to point out too, and the reason why I'm including myself in this too, is that these poor spending habits, they tend to exist in a vacuum. Like each time I would take an Uber trip home, which not that often, but I have worse habits, like how often I might end up getting fast food. They're not perceived in aggregate. So when we don't look at our spending habits and in a big picture, then, oh, well, this burger here just doesn't matter all that much. But then we look at, how many times have I actually bought these? How many times have I taken this trip? And then that adds up. And then you realize how much money you could be saving if you had that big picture view of yourself.
I love that you brought that up because I can't help but constantly reference the parallel that comes by way of the comparisons between, fiscal and financial responsibility and physical health. They're very, very similar in so many different ways. So I couldn't agree with you more. And it's funny because if you're tracking what you're putting into your body, it's so much easier to make subconscious adjustments. And a lot of the reason that I ended up where I am today is just because I flat out rebel against a lot of the recommendations that were made to me throughout my lifetime. So much of it just felt like a slap on the hand, sort of a subconscious punishment of a lecture every time you're doing something you shouldn't do. It makes me want to do it more. Somebody says, oh, don't buy this, don't buy that. It makes me want to do it more. That's why I wasn't attracted to the Dave Ramsey philosophies, because it felt so restrictive. And I'm not a sacrificial type of person. I'm an abundance type of a person. I don't like scarcity. And so, I had to reinvent my relationship with spending. I have to reframe through a collection of various exercises that are really helpful for me. For instance, I've always liked Red Bull, right? I'm a little ashamed of that. It's not healthy, speaking of health, but hey, I like it, right?
I'll tell you this much about Red Bull is that I think I'm the only person on the planet who really likes the taste of Red Bull. The caffeine, the energy side of it, but for me, I don't know, the citrus composition. I just love drinking Red Bull. I don't have it too often, but yeah, I don't know, something about the way I'm wired, I guess.
Well, beyond the health aspect, it's obviously ridiculously expensive, right? $4 or $5 a can is easy to find. And when I'm standing there at an impulse crossroad, standing at a checkout, and I have the option of grabbing an ice cold can and dropping $4 on that can, I don't necessarily recognize that 4 can on the future interest cost impact is directly influenced by typically by 3 to 5 times of that face-to-face dollar, which means that if I just simply took that $4 and even attacked future interest on, say, one of my rental mortgages, I could easily, through the amortization calculator that's inside our cash flow cruncher worksheet, I'll see a $12 to $20 impact of that $4. So I look at this and say, well, hold on a second here, right? This can of Red Bull is $12. It's like, fuck no, man. I don't want the Red Bull anymore. And it's an easy decision for me to walk into without feeling like I'm getting the slap on the wrist or being restrictive and something I actually really want I couldn't have. No, it's me saying, well, it's not worth 12. So it becomes my own decision versus this sort of rebellious suggestion that people who are smarter than me have made to me. And so that has been a very positive influence to me. And I think if people only knew what the future cost of the typical things they're buying of every dollar, where it was going, people would just hold off on things more on a discretionary level. So that has been really helpful for me as sort of these mind manipulation tactics that sort of changed what I was taught growing up.
Yeah, I noticed that I have a persuasion element inside my mind, inside my conscious. The persuader is constantly trying to talk me into certain things, and as soon as I find myself agreeing with them, I think, oh no, wait a minute, this is the persuader trying to get me to go back on a promise I made myself last week.
Interesting. Very interesting.
Yeah.
I think that's good. Yeah. I mean, you've got to be able to, you got to stop that small talk. I mean, you're going to have that devil on your shoulder, and listen, instant gratification has become a real addiction for people, by and large, because of how easy it is to, to push with a couple of mouse buttons. You can get Santa every day.
Mm-hmm. And one thing I wanted to express about how I've been able to at least get more of a grip on this is that anticipation is one of the best things about gratification. Waiting for something that pays off is where most of that good feeling comes from. So me personally, I limit, say, like, I'll go to Starbucks once a week, no more. Takeout once a week, no more than that. And that way it's given me something to look forward to on a week-to-week basis. It's given me a way to enhance my Monday and my Tuesday, knowing that on Wednesday I'm going to go get takeout.
It's an excellent point.
So there are ways to get more value out of our mindset just by limiting ourselves.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you're treating it as a reward. And you can celebrate too. There's a lot of reasons to do that. A lot of times with business development, I'm doing the same thing where I earn the upgrade. If I'm wanting to make a decent investment, I've got to make certain income objectives in order to then go out and invest into that next expensive investment that I'm, fingers crossed is going to work. But there's mm-hmm. always risk involved with business development. And again, I see all too often people who aren't necessarily great at follow through, and they're easily sucked into the next shiny business idea. And so the goal is to, again, get yourself into a position where you're generating rewards and you're creating celebrations that will then feed even more cash flow. And we've really, I want to say I invented this concept through parallel thinking called what we call lifestyle assets. And lifestyle assets are where we can essentially get anything we want and use it to grow our cash flow. So what most people would consider to be liabilities, like this $35,000 Polaris that I bought last year, that would by most definitions be considered a liability. But if I can use that tool as a tax deductible purchase on a property where it's being used as a utility vehicle, we can actually put that to work in our short-term rental. It increases the amount of money we make just by virtue of it serving the needs we have around the land, because it's a fairly large property. And yet, of course, the recreational aspect of it is just sort of a perk, right? And the same thing with our Airbnb property. Our Airbnb property serves our purpose by way of us personally using it. We get to actually use and enjoy it, where we get to live and travel for free. There's a video on our channel that's titled "How I Live and Travel for Free." We bought 2 RVs this year alone. We bought a 42-foot fifth wheel. We bought a 24-foot travel trailer, and a large truck to take it all around with us. And we get to travel anytime we want to. When the house isn't being rented, we're obviously staying in it, which amounts to anywhere between 7.5 to 8 years, 7.5 to 8 months of the year. And it pays us $50,000 a month. So it's a great way for us to be able to sort of focus on these more expensive decisions than we would normally make, because the net cash flow improvement is the underlying objective by that decision. And I did find out just recently that somebody's been using the term lifestyle asset before I did. So I do want to give credit. I don't even know the guy's name. Somebody brought it up to me. No, I heard about that. And they were talking about it a few years ago. I thought I was genius for coming up with this term. So credit where credit is due. If I knew the name, I'd share it with you. But unfortunately, sounds like there were more than just me thinking, hey, how can I also, have my cake and eat it too? That's the rebel in me.
Well, you came to it independently. So it almost sounds like one task might be to find all those other people who came to it independently and get together and have a conversation with them, because you might have other commonalities too, right? Your mind got to that point.
There's no question about it. Yeah. Until then, I'm just Amy Schumer.
All right, so here's one that I've been dying to ask, and we've touched on it here and there as we've been talking, but I want to make sure that we sink our teeth into this because this is probably the most shocking thing that I had seen looking at the content in preparation for this interview. I went into it with some preconceived notions about proper money management. For instance, when given the choice between renting and owning, my preconceived notion is that owning is almost invariably the superior choice. And you have a video, by the way, that gets into that. The second one, and this is the one that seriously had my gears turning, is the futility of savings. And those aren't your words, those are my words. But the rate, basically what happens is if the rate of inflation exceeds the rate of interest, then that money over time is actually losing value. So I have an undisclosed amount of money in my savings. It's more than 10K. So, there's money there. For people like me who are now seriously considering what else we can do with that money sitting in the bank and generating interest that's not keeping up with inflation, how do we stop the bleeding? What can we do to start getting that money to go somewhere more useful?
Well, you're exactly right. Putting money in savings is basically the same as your money just gradually losing value over time. And a lot of people don't realize it, but the concept of banking actually started in the 11th century in Italy, and they're essentially in the risk management business. They just take calculated risks, and that's obviously why credit is such an important piece to this equation. People put their money in the bank. They do that because of safety. They do that because of convenience. They do that because it's liquid, and then banks lend that money out through something called fractional reserve lending. Now, I don't want to get too deep into economics. I'm just not the qualified specialist on the subject, but I'm here to tell you just the basic concept behind fractional reserve, where for every dollar you deposit into checking and savings accounts, the bank has permission to lend out up to 9 times that dollar. So $9 gets lent out for every dollar you have in. If you have 10K in your bank, they have the ability to lend out $90,000 towards other borrowers. And that's how they make money. They make money by many services, buying and selling currencies, offering these savings deposits. They charge these service fees every month. They charge overdraft fees. They charge ATM fees. They offer credit cards, merchant services, etc. And the major problem with banks right now is that many of them moved away from the role of providing long-term financial products. Instead, they prefer these short-term gains that come with these higher risks, and ultimately, you're there putting your money in, getting very, very little out of it. Therefore, we're concentrating on maximizing each side of the balance sheet. There's only 2 ways to grow your cash flow, right? The first way is to make more money. The second way is, of course, to spend less money. That's it. Now, there are a lot of semantics on each side of that, a lot of options, in fact, arguably infinite options, especially on the make more money side of that conversation. On the spend less side of the balance sheet, and the reason I've always loved attacking and eliminating debt very quickly is because even if I'm paying low interest rate, even through promotional periods or even over a fixed term like a 2.8% mortgage, I want to pay that off still in 5 years because I'm going to free up that cash flow of the minimum payment obligation that I'm servicing. Even if a significant portion of it's going towards principal, I want the cash flow. But there are still restrictions on how much I can do. There's a maximum capability. I only have so much potential. I can slice and dice and save. I can go into the scarcity side of the spectrum where I'm a coupon cutter and I'm cutting 5 hours worth of coupons to save $90 on toothpaste. But for most people, the average household is really looking at somewhere in the low thousands capability, best case scenario. There are some people that are anomalies on much higher than that. They're big earners, high income earners, high spenders, and they can cut a lot. There are people that are much lower than low thousands and really can only cut to the extent of hundreds, maybe high hundreds every month. But in the end, thousands a month is not uncommon. It's the norm. Whereas on the income and asset side of the balance sheet, there's endless potential. You and I we have to agree that the potential is limitless. And so again, another exercise that I've used to sort of hack my own brain. It's worked very effectively for me. Maybe it'll help a couple people on your end. I call it the 0 to Bezos scale. Now, the 0 to Bezos scale is a top-down strategy versus bottom-up strategy. And when I was growing up, maybe you can relate to this, but I always reference the fact that my friends in school, if there were whispers around, recess that, hey, my parents make $100,000, those people were rich, man. Okay, so in my own small mind, for the first 18 years of my life, and even a couple years beyond that, I looked at the pinnacle as $100K a year. I want to make six figures. And when I said six figures, I even looked at $250,000 a year as fantasy. It was unrealistically impossible to do. So I just wasn't really I wasn't in that MD space. I wasn't in that Esquire space. I was very much I was just a normal dummy that knew I wasn't good at school. And so that was what I was shooting for. Well, guess what? I mean, the more you start to break that down, dollars per hour, you're looking at $50. And I remember for a long period of my life, roughly half of my life, I was thinking $50 was good. I remember the first time I hit 20 an hour, I'm thinking, man, I'm really on my way. I just got to keep working my way up to 50 and then I'll be at 100,000. It wasn't really until probably about 6-ish years ago now that, again, I reinvented my relationship in another way with money, which was, why the hell am I focusing my time and effort and energy on targeting this 100K maximum possibility instead of looking at what the superstars of the earnings world are actually pulling in? And of course, you've got to look at the world record holder, which is Bezos. And the last time I ran through this exercise physically on Google, I just went on there and said, how much is this guy making? It said, and this was in 2019, that's the last time I physically ran through the exercise. And it says, hey, in his best months in 2018, he's pulling down, north of 160 million per day. In his worst months, he's pulling down 97 million per day. And I'm thinking, 97 million a day. And here I am fighting for 100,000 a year at 50 an hour. 97 million a day on a 10-hour workday is $9.7 million an hour.
I have an easier time believing you met Larry King than I am believing that, which I fully believe it, by the way. But what you're saying just now, 97 million a day.
By the way, it wasn't the real Larry King. It was just a random guy named Larry King. I just thought that was funny. I didn't actually meet the Larry King, unfortunately.
All right, fair enough. Well, it's a good thing I
story is a random stranger named Larry King, which I loved. And I found his glasses that much more amusing. So this idea of some guy who famously created something from nothing. He wasn't handed anything on a silver platter. This was not some nepotism. There's pictures, we've all seen it, of him in his garage or in his basement with a handwritten sign on the wall of Amazon. And we think to ourselves, 9.7 million an hour. If I'm only 1/10 of 1% as capable of this other human being, if he's that much better than me, that much savvier than I am, I'm still able to pull in $9,700 an hour. Why am I focusing on 50? And it was such a supercharge towards my initial transition into the online space, because the world is available to us online. And I transitioned from geographically isolated education, and I would step into rooms and educate people face to face, and I might sit in front of 100 people in one class, 5 people in another class, 300 in another. But I was really limited there too. And as I started to branch into the geographically boundless potential of the internet, it was a combination of that and my mentality shifting, that if I'm only focusing on $1 million per year at this point, I'm thinking too small, much less 100,000 a year. And so I want everybody here to realize that, yes, having your money sitting in checking and savings will do so little for you by way of your return and what the banks are willing to pay you at this point, that you will feel insulted for keeping your money in that account. And yes, by way of inflation, you will lose value of your money over time each and every day that goes by. It does not mean you have to rush and find a sort of higher risk place for your money to serve you. You can be patient and find a way for low risk to produce high returns. I think that there is a dangerous myth that risk is relative to reward.
Mm-hmm.
That is not true. You can find low risk, especially in online commerce, and you can have boundless potential with that. We're making $1 million a year. My very first year using ClickFunnels, I joined the 2 Comma Club with ClickFunnels. So it took me less than a year to generate almost $1.5 million online. And that was almost from scratch. I had a very small presence of roughly 7,500 subscribers on YouTube at that time. So it wasn't like I was starting from nothing, but we're at 229 or 230,000 subscribers today. So there's been a lot of progress in a very short period of time by just directing my focus towards that. And again, incredible amounts of money, hundreds of thousands per month that I never thought was possible in earlier years of my life. And now I look at it and say, this is bullshit, right? It's a perpetual discontent. And I think having perpetual discontent is important in general with how you operate your business, but also how you operate your banking and borrowing. You should look at any amount of debt as totally unacceptable. You should look at any amount of cash flow as totally unacceptable. And it should be a perpetual pursuit of progress and potential. And I think that's how the superstars do it.
Because you were mentioning about the mindset that you had when you were in school. And I remember the mindset that I had was that once people were rich, they were disconnected from society. And so the only way to earn any living was to get other money from other people in the working class or in the middle class. And I know that's not true. I know that the wealthy are still participating in economics. I think it's just it can be discouraging for people to think that there's this barrier where if they're lucky, they'll get out. And because statistically speaking, not everybody in the middle class makes it into the upper middle class, and then upper middle class makes it into the wealthy and 1%, and then the fractions of the 1%. But really, it's all just mindset. It really all is just motivation and figuring out how each individual person has a route laid out for them to get there.
I agree. And I also think that a lot of that mindset requires agility. It requires adaptation, right? You can't have a mindset that, hey, we're in this boat, and if we just keep going and we slam hard enough into that glacier, we're going to make it through. No. Sometimes you're heading down the wrong path, and you have a lot of persistence, and your mentality in most ways might be right where it needs to be. But because you're unwilling to make adjustments and to recognize through data that things just simply aren't going the way you want, you have to split test things until you reach what they call, maximum efficiency or maximum trajectory. And the only way to do that, especially when you're dealing with e-commerce, is test again, split test the third way, right? And you just keep doing it. That's been my biggest reason for success, is not just the persistence and the right mentality, but because I was, 9 out of the 10 things I tried don't work. And if I wasn't willing to put in the effort on the 10th one, I might quit right before I'm on the verge of great success. And so I completely agree with you. But a big ingredient to the right state of mind is agility and adaptation. So you got to shift it up as necessary to get what you're looking for.
We're getting close to the final 10 minutes of this, because I know you have a time limit as well, and I want to shift to the Airbnb thing for a moment, because this was another bit of content that I looked up. And serendipitously speaking, I was talking about this to a friend over the weekend. So for me, the timing of that was something that I wanted to address. And what he told me is that landlords in apartments will cut out the middle people, and they'll just rent the rooms out to Airbnb guests. And I know that's not what you guys were talking about. What you guys were talking about was you would rent an apartment, or perhaps own it. Maybe I didn't quite take note on that part. And then whether it's being rented, which is doable, then it would just be serviced out to other guests. And then the revenue is 5x what a core renter might get. So this, I think, speaks to the adaptation and the flexibility that you're talking about. And it's also innovative too, because you have one person renting it, giving it out to somebody else, really maximizing the space, making sure that it's not going to waste at any point. So my first question is, I was just wondering, has the prospect of a landlord directly renting Airbnb out to guests, has that crossed your radar at all? You don't have to like expound on it, but I'm just wondering if you've seen or heard about this particular part.
Yeah, and again, I'll defer to at least one specific video. I'm still a student in the space. This was just a brand new business model I always found really fascinating. I've always loved real estate, and I've always been on the innovative side of things by way of what I call modern income. I think if you're not focusing on ways that people like yourself, people like your audience, people like me are making money, you're missing a huge opportunity because of the evolution of technology. If you just look back a short time ago, short-term rentals weren't even a thing, not in the sense that they are today, right? You had to stay in a hotel or a typical old school Airbnb where there was actually breakfast waiting for you in the morning and the homeowners were there with you. Again, there's a lot of new ways of doing things that I'm discovering by way of doing the same thing that you're doing here by inviting me on the channel, which is I reach out to those specialists. And there was this couple that I saw on Facebook as a member of the community. If I'm in an industry, I'm going in and trying to connect with as many specialists as I can. And I see this post that says, we're 22 months into our short-term rental business, and we've already broken $655,000 in revenue. We've broken 1,000 reservations for our first 22 months. We have over 800 4.9 average out of 5-star reviews. And I'm thinking, what am I doing wrong? Right? What is $50,000 a year doing for me? Now, I obviously acknowledge there are some big differences because we use our Airbnb for a majority of each year. And that's not what they're doing. So I reached out, I DM'd them through Facebook. I invited them to come on the channel and share their story. And it blew me away what they've managed to accomplish by being really clever about their short-term renting business. And essentially what they've done is a combination of things. The first 2 properties that they own were properties they purchased. One was hers, one was his. They came together. They ended up moving into one of the 2, rented out the other one, and then again, short-term rent out the other one and then fix up the basement of the one they're living in, and they're short-term renting both of those out. Those are the only 2 properties that they owned. Just like me, I own mine. But it required a lot of money down. Out of a $610,000 purchase, I put 20% in. That's $125K roughly. I ended up putting over-the-top decor and amenities in the thing. It cost me well over $200,000 just to get my property where I wanted it. Obviously, if I'm making $50 a year, not bad ROIs, 25% cash on cash. I'm happy with that, but I could have done a lot better. And what they started doing to grow their portfolio up to 12 properties was they started partnering with these landlords or the actual homeowners, where they would either go in as a tenant and sublet the property out to other guests through short term, very transparently. It was all agreed on the front end with the landlord. They're not doing it secretly. Then they began also partnering with landlords, the homeowner, by saying, look, let's split the money that's coming in. And what this has done is, it woke me up to this whole new way of allowing short-term rentals to serve me well, where for a fraction of the cost, I don't have to come up with a down payment, which I normally would. I don't have an 80% 30-year mortgage that I have to bury myself in debt with as I grow a portfolio. And the landlord, the homeowner, actually purchases all the furniture for the partnership. So it's been a really amazing strategy. I just had a conversation with that couple again last week on the channel. The interview's on the on YouTube. Check it out. And they broke the $1 million mark. This is now their 24th month. They surpassed their 2-year anniversary in October. So they're at about 25 or 26 months now, and they're already over $1 million of income. You know as well as I do that growing a business in 2 years that goes past $1 million is very difficult to do. It's unusual. That's an anomaly. So I was so impressed with their ability behind this. And they did it all with nothing, right? They did it with no knowledge, no coaches or mentors. Now they sell a coaching now, which if I were going into that space, in a different way that I am in now, and that's my intention at some point. I've stepped into other businesses recently that I'm focusing on, but when I choose to grow that, I will do it their way, right? And when I do it their way, I will do it with their blueprint, because I don't want to learn all the hard lessons that they've learned along the way if I can avoid them by just simply paying for their guidance. So I am a huge believer in mentorship. I'm a huge advocate for coaching. We sell it ourselves. We're very, very strict about who we allow in. I know that sounds almost gimmicky, but you got to understand we do all of our coaching one-on-one, which means that it takes a tremendous amount of our time to work with the right candidates. We'd rather work with people that we know are going to do well. It preserves our reputation. And anybody that Google searches VIP financial education will see that there are maybe 2 or 3 people that have ever expressed disappointment. Otherwise, we have an A+ rating with the BBB and an otherwise perfect reputation over 20 years. And you don't do that dealing with as many thousands of people as we have by mistreating folks. So we're very selective. I know Michael and Katrina are selective too. But to answer your question, that is one of the most innovative forms of how to get into the short-term rental market with very little money out of pocket and without with very little, if any, credit at all. So people who have bad credit can get into the space because they're not actually out borrowing mortgages for this approach. And I like that. The only downside to it is you obviously aren't collecting the assets that appreciate over time. And I think that given the crazy circumstances going on right now in the country, that's actually a much safer place to be, because you have rental moratoriums. These tenants don't have to pay rent. It can be pretty dangerous right now to be a long-term landlord, which I also am. I've been lucky; my tenants have paid, but we've heard horror stories, and they can basically just shut the door in your face and say, "Sorry, I'm not paying." That's scary. So I like giving the ownership to somebody else.
That checks out. And that was one of the videos. I mentioned it briefly in the other question about my question about banking and savings, is the breakdown between renting and owning. And it's encouraging to hear that both routes have their strengths and weaknesses, and a lot of it is depending on timing.
Can I add one thing to that?
By all means.
And I don't mean to cut you off, but I do want to elaborate briefly that the difference between a short-term rental business and a long-term rental business is the short-term rental business is a short-term net cash flow solution. Long-term tenants are not a short-term net cash flow solution. It's a long-term net worth solution. And too many times I see people confusing investing in real estate as a short-term solution to their cash flow needs. It is not. Half the time you will wonder whether or not your properties are making you more broke. You will be babysitting adults. You will be dealing with leaky toilets. There is a lot about it that is unattractive. And that is why people didn't survive the last downturn, is because they were towing the line of buying as much as they could, barely being able to afford it for an extra $300, $400, $500 a month increase to their bottom line. That is not enough to take on that kind of debt at this point. You need to solve the short-term net cash flow equation, like Michael and Katrina have done, like I have done in many other ways, and then take that surplus of cash flow. If you build your cash flow to 10,000, then 25, then 50, then 100,000 a month, if you have an extra 100,000 a month left over after your bills are paid, after you go to restaurants once they're open again, once you buy things online, and that's really an overage, the next best question is, what do I do with all this? It's the best problem to have. And taking that and then buying long-term rental properties that you can short-term rent out, taking on the asset because you can put so much more down and you can cash flow so much more highly and have such lower risk levels, is, in my opinion, the best formula to follow. And nobody talks about that. Everybody on YouTube is making it, they paint this picture like long-term buy and hold real estate is this sure way of success. And I don't believe that to be true. I think you will never rent a yacht in Europe because you have rental properties at home. You'll never go, wow, this is because of my rentals. You can do that with short-term net cash flow solutions, which includes short-term rentals as an example. It also includes e-commerce in many, many ways. Lots of ways you can get into e-commerce and solve the short-term net cash flow equation. But long-term rentals, in my opinion, long-term investments should be the last step of your investing versus falsely painting it as something it isn't.
Just one additional observation I wanted to add on to that too is it makes a great deal of sense to rent it out for short term because it gives you a chance to make sure you know what could go wrong. Like if there's something wrong with the toilet or something wrong with the shower or the sink. I'm seem to be hung up on plumbing because of what you talked about earlier. If somebody ends up going in 2 weeks, they leave a review, at least you know. And then you're more prepared for longer term renters where the problem could be a little bit more pronounced or protracted. What if they don't tell you about it? And the toilet just leaks and leaks and leaks.
And we go into short-term rentals with a long-term rental contingency plan. So a plan B is we end up with a long-term rental by accident with a short-term rental as intention. And the long-term rental has to supplement the need of the cost of the property, right? If my mortgage is $2,500, I'm not going to buy that property if my long-term tenant rental capabilities are $2,000. I'll be upside down by $500 a month. So it has to play into the decision. My intention is to short-term rent it. But if for whatever reason the county says, hey, no more short-term rentals, that's beyond my control. So we have to have a plan B for that acquisition. Otherwise, we end up stuck with assets that become liabilities. It's very careful to focus more than any other area on cash flow.
Matthew, I got to say, I'm going to need to listen to this episode again because you've given me so much great information and I'm doing my best to absorb it. And I can't wait to go back and unearth so much more of what you talked about. But I think we're out of time. I don't know how much longer I can keep you. So to our listeners, what we've done today is just give you a window into what Matthew talks about. And I strongly recommend you go to the YouTube channel and sink your teeth into all of this because a lot of the people on my side, a lot of my listeners, they're in the e-commerce space, things are going well and they're generating money and they might be asking, what do I do with it next? And so go to Matthew's channel and you will find out what to do with it next and how to properly apply it to improving your life going forward. So Matthew, I want to thank you. This has been fantastic. I also want to thank my own body for not drying my voice out. Sometimes my voice dries out and I'm trying to figure out a remedy to stop it from happening. So I'm giving.
Sounded great.
Yeah, I appreciate that. It was. If you have any last minute wisdom, not that you haven't already dispensed plenty, but I like to give people a chance just in case there was a question you're hoping I'd ask. I didn't quite get it out, so I'll let you have the floor one more time. And while you're at it, let people know how to reach out to you.
Well, I appreciate that. Yeah, I cannot reiterate it too many times. I'm just going to reemphasize the fact that you need to download the Cash Flow Cruncher and track your numbers. Track your numbers if it's the one thing you take away from this. If you're listening to everything else saying, what is this guy rambling on about? I don't understand the power of leverage and borrowing money and using credit. Fine. But at least go in and get your Cash Flow Cruncher and track what's coming in, track what's going out. You can make adjustments that will absolutely be worth your time. For most people, it's worth way more than any other way they could spend their time. So I'm just going to leave it at that, is to get the Cash Flow Cruncher and obviously set yourself up with a Credit Karma account. It's also free as well. And track your credit and make sure that you're looking as appealing as possible to people with the money. You want people to want to give you money. Okay. As far as finding us, please do join us on the channel. That's all we ask. Visit VIP Financial Ed on YouTube. VIP Financial Ed is an education. You can also look up VIP Financial Education if it's easier to remember. You can find us at the same place on Insta as well. So check us out there too. And be sure to watch some of the most recent videos if you're interested in anything like Airbnb, if you're interested in anything like the infinite banking concept, where you can gradually eliminate the need for banks in your life ever again. We talk a lot about that on our channel. We talk about getting completely out of debt and being 100% mortgage and non-mortgage related debt-free. We talk about investing in real estate, where you can buy long-term rentals and add those to your long-term investment strategy, where you can retire. You can have people paying your bills for you every single month. So just check out the channel. It's all free content. So join us there.
Excellent. All right, everybody. That's all the time that we've got for today. We will check in with you next time. Take care. Thanks for listening. You might have found this show on any number of platforms: Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Play, Stitcher, or right here on Debutify. Whatever the case, if you enjoyed this content and want to help us thrive, please take a few moments to leave a review on Apple Podcasts or wherever you think is best. We also want to hear from you, so whether you think you'd be a good guest or want to weigh in on anything related to our show, you can email podcast@debutify.com or connect with us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok. Finally, this podcast is created by the passionate team at Debutify. If you're ready to take the plunge into e-commerce or are looking to up your game, head over to debutify.com and see how it can change your life and the lives of many through what you do next.